This is the Balanced Advisor Podcast with Dr. Travis Perry, helping financial advisors like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Travis Perry. I have in a virtual office with us, Amy Castoro. Amy specializes in preparing high net worth families to successfully transition wealth while keeping members unified and in control of their assets. She's the president and chief executive officer of the Williams Group, which prepares families for the smooth transfer of wealth across generations. She's an author, keynote speaker, and senior family coach whose clients value a compassionate approach that fosters long-term relationships and yields results. She is also the author of Bridging Generations, Transitioning Family Wealth and Value for Sustainable Legacy. Welcome, Amy, to the show.
Travis, thank you for having me. It's so exciting to be part of your group here. This is such an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed getting to know Amy here in the pre-show. There's a bunch of really cool snippets that maybe we'll get to later in the show. But first, tell us, how'd you get into serving this industry, to being part of the financial planning, group here and really helping families this way?
You know, I never thought I would be here. Honestly, I took an accounting class in college and professor looked down at me and he said, you know what? This is not for you. I actually got kicked out of accounting and here I am. So luckily at the Williams Group, we don't actually manage money, but we do manage relationships. And that happens to be something I'm really pretty good at. So how I got here, I had spent maybe 5 years with the Walt Disney Company, where I was part of the Disney University. And we did some really amazing work in looking at how we build culture. How do we train our employees to be focused on what the culture of the organization stands for, and everybody in alignment with the purpose of that. And then I went to work for Grant Thornton, a management consulting firm, where we worked with small and medium-sized family businesses. And we looked at, do we have the right people in the right seats, and answered big questions like, should we keep the business or sell the business? And then we were also looking at, how do we work together as a team? What's the culture that we have here? So while all of this work was really exciting, I found that for me, what was super exciting was working with the individuals, the human condition inside of those structures. So I went and got a coaching certification. And through that process, I met a gentleman who was working with the Williams Group at that time. And do you remember the day I had the phone to my ear and he said, we keep families together so their wealth can change the world. And I thought, okay, never saw that coming, but that's what I'm going to do. So I flew out to California and I met with Roy Williams then, who 6'7", just a tremendous guy. I'm 5'2". And just the presence of him and the commitment he is for the well-being of humans, I just thought, okay, this is what I'm doing. And so by the grace of God and good fortune, I landed here. And that was about 11 years ago.
Oh, I'd never know you were 5'2" behind the camera, but that's always kind of like, I used to teach class and, the class I taught was like this stadium seating. It kind of went up, and students would come down and talk to me and then they'd be like, oh, you look so much taller down, and I was further up, it's all relative, but I could understand your experience is incredible. Like the depth of your working experience, your resume there, to be able to come and help the industry in such a profound way absolutely is needed. Like in our pre-show, we were talking about some of the experiences we've had. They're very similar. I wasn't kicked out of accounting class, but man, I started down into the business major at my university, only to realize this really has nothing to do with financial planning. I want much more of a relational emphasis, and did social science instead. So it's interesting the way that things kind of pan out and work. And we're glad to have you, and what your company does is great. We'll get to more of that in a minute, but listen, you're a mom, a wife, you have 2 grown children, and you have this business that you're running, you're an author, you speak. What is your definition of balance, Amy?
For me, it comes down to whether or not I'm centered through my day. So I know that when I'm off balance, I'm jumping from one thing to another, and I don't have a moment to catch my breath, or I don't have a moment to just be present. and honestly be grateful for where I am. So for me, balance means I'm able to make good decisions. I'm settled internally. I'm able to respond to a lot of stuff that's happening in a way that feels good for me instead of just reacting to the situation. It also means that I'm able to be here, on my calendar, which can get pretty full. There's always 12 to 1 is blocked because my daughter happens to be home, working from home. My husband works from home. Now my son is home from graduate school. So we all meet in the kitchen for lunch. So everybody has their calendar blocked from 12 to 1. And then at 6 o'clock, it says dinner. So I know that I'm going to be there for dinner. So that's one way I manage to keep that balance on my calendar. And it's not always easy to say, I can't be available at that time, but because I have such a commitment to family, it makes sense for me.
Yeah, time blocking it's vital. It's important. But the other thing you kind of bring up here is time for family, which I've seen some stats about families actually eating dinner together. Yeah. And it's stifling. Like it's bad. It's quite abhorrent, like what we do. And a lot of that is we just overschedule not only ourselves, but we overschedule our families, don't we? Our own kids. Yeah. So that's a struggle. That's so cool that you guys do that. You still get together and you make that happen. I love that you talked about being centered. Balance, man, I've talked about so many different definitions, analogies. Centering makes a lot of sense for sort of the metaphysical, the mental, even the psychological. There's the centering, spiritual aspects talk about that too. Mm-hmm. But what I like what you said is you're feeling centered, right? It's that feeling. When I wrote this book, Achieving Balance, we talked about like the idea of balance isn't being in every single area all the time. A perfect equilibrium is not balance. We're always going to be out of that balance, right? But it's the feeling that you have of being centered. Yeah. If we look at that deeper, a lot of advisors tell me, or maybe not deeper, just in a little bit different way, Amy, is that they feel balanced when they're living their highest priorities in life. Essentially, your terms, being centered. I like that a lot. Yeah. What would you say are some of the things that you personally have struggled with as a business owner, being in this industry, speaker, being a mom and a wife and trying to do everything without losing that centeredness? What do you think are some of those things that maybe just like throw you off course, get you off balance and out of center?
I think it's that imposter syndrome, to be perfectly honest. I've been doing this for 11 years. And every time I work with a family, they say, wow, this is so great. We've learned so much. And I feel so good about where they are headed. But I still, recently gave a presentation and the slide deck that I was supposed to use was the wrong deck. And so there I found myself on the stage looking at these slides and thinking, oh my gosh, I need these slides to be able to get through the presentation. But what I realized through that experience was actually I don't need the slides. I can do it without them, and that I've lived this long enough. And there's a very good chance I know a lot more about this stuff than anybody else in the room. So I think I also trust my teachers. I've had some phenomenal teachers through my life, and I think I can rest on that foundation. I stand on the shoulders of giants, Roy Williams being one of them, both physically and his contribution to this space. But yeah, I think also the other way I get challenged with balance is I wear a lot of hats. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, but I'm also a CEO, and I'm also a coach, and also the president. So I have different roles that I'm pretty busy with, and a speaker, which luckily for me comes pretty naturally. So
yeah, I was going to say, like, you do it well, and you're exactly right. I'm in the process of, I always have a coach, and I've always had a coach, whether it's, formalized a relationship, there, or, just a mentor or of some sort. Right now, I'm in a program that's helping me become a better speaker, and I'm used to having the slides and just going up and sort of winging it, but with a little bit of prep, just because I know I could talk about a lot of things, but they're teaching me, like, ditch the slides and perform and get up there and just be in the moment, but actually have like a script. Maybe not, you have to say exact word for word, but being able to be there, and you have enough experience to know that that's exactly what you had to do when the slides weren't there.
Right.
But I think it's in those moments that we maybe think about that balance, that you get kind of blindsided. I think the last podcast guest, we were talking about like kids recalling, or somebody interrupts, like distractions. And all of a sudden we're out of that center. We're out of that spot where we feel comfortable in. We're like, whoa, we've got to bring it back. How do we bring it back? You also bring up imposter syndrome, which is, this is absolutely truthful for so many advisors that I talk to, like imposter syndrome, some type of fear, something that they think it's not really true. Because you strike me as someone who's like competent, very educated, just rich experience, but you probably still get nervous on stage, right? You probably still have those little voices in your ear that are like, hey, you can't do this. I'm like, yes, I can. Like, I got this, and you did it. So when imposter syndrome creeps in, what do you do? How do you react? Or how are you proactive maybe to even cope with that or deal with it?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's a battle to stay present, right? So the imposter syndrome will pop me out and send me into that spiral. But in that moment is when I'm really grounding myself. That's when I'm feeling my feet on the floor. That's where I'm breathing 2 inches below my belly button. That's where I'm standing in my full length and really owning my space, just physically. And then I find that if my body is in that certain kind of shape, then my brain will follow. But the more present I can be, the less I'm spinning up and out. So I try not to just buy into that. And I do find that's true for me. Like, I can get myself kind of crazy before I get on stage, but once I'm on, I'm like, oh yeah, this is who I really am.
Yeah, I'm back. I got it.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. Something somebody taught me a long time ago about imposter syndrome. Actually, when I first got into this industry, I was 22. And I was a financial advisor.
Right.
And I was trying to, get clients twice my age, to get them to allow me to manage their money or talk to them about comprehensive planning when my life experience was this much compared to where they're at. Yeah. And something that struck me real big back then was, just remember, you probably know 10 times more than they do about this subject. And if you stand your ground and you're confident, you're not faking it till you make it type of this thing. Yeah. It's genuine. It's authentic. Yeah. They'll eventually relinquish and realize, okay, you know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. Sure. And I think, imposter syndrome is sort of similar in the fact that it's trying to get you off center, out of balance, whatever it might be, whatever term you want to use. But that if we can remember, no, wait a minute, I have some of these skills. Or if you don't have the skills, I know I can find these skills. I can get some help with this.
Well, luckily for me, I can also look at the results we've accomplished, and it's pretty profound. Every time we get to work with an advisor or work with a family, they're really happy with what they've learned and how it's shifting their way of orienting. So I do often go back and look at the testimonials, or I'll look at comments people have made, and I say, wow, all right, let's go with their interpretation. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, you can always lean on that. Absolutely right. Yeah. What a great idea. And I know if you have testimonials or you've got great experiences with clients, that can help too. What would you say, you've built a great business. You've been doing this for a little while, a hot minute, as they say. What would you say the biggest struggle is for the company right now to scale without losing the balance that you enjoy?
I wonder about that question, scale. We're very high touch. When we work with families, we have a max in terms of really how many families we're comfortable supporting, because we really want to deliver exceptional service. So I'm not so interested in just growing the business for the sake of growth. We do have about 20 coaches across the US, so we can take a lot. But I'm not really interested in expanding beyond the US and Canada. I feel like the amount of outreach and the amount of work that we have right now, we can serve really, really powerfully. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. So I'm pretty satisfied with what we have. I think ultimately, if I look at opportunities, it's probably going to be finding ways to use technology in powerful ways, because I think that can help us scale.
I like it. Yeah. You're focused on
remote work and building the skills to work remotely. We did a lot of remote work over COVID. And what we learned was, wow, we can serve more families in a day than we could when we were in person. So that, I think there's more to unpack there on how we could do this work and how we can train both families and advisors to engage powerfully remotely.
Let's talk about that. I recently responded to an article that went viral. Not my response, but the article went viral by a good friend of mine, Derek Notman, who also wrote the foreword to the book, Achieving Balance. And we talked about how this article came out saying Zoom just killed creativity. And like 100 and something thousand people responded like, no, it didn't. Like Zoom has actually helped us to reach an audience that in a day that we could no longer do it. We've been doing some funny videos over here, like trying to do a little sketch comedy, and we use Zoom as one of the tools.
Yeah.
And one of the things my character is like, no way, like a balanced advisor loves Zoom because travel time, going back and forth, the reschedule, like if somebody has to reschedule and I don't like it, and it's something that we try to teach our clients, give us some time. But if there's a true emergency or something happens, especially like travel related these days, it's a lot easier to be like, oh man, I can't make it. That's fine. I'm still at my desk. I can now be more productive instead of driving out to their place of business to have to reschedule. Like I remember those days. Those were horrible.
Absolutely. No, I agree. We've done a lot of advisor training through Zoom that wouldn't have been possible if we had to wait for everybody to get together. And we can break it up so that it's a half day, like a half day and then a half day and then a half day. And then we can also come together for these cohort groups where before we would have to figure out how we're all going to get in one spot. Now we can all just jump on a call and make sure the learning's sustainable. So that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were talking about quality and quantity really of clients, bringing on, and you guys are comfortable where you're at least quantity, but the quality is super important. You don't want to sacrifice that, but yet technology is allowing to do that. And there's a ton of fintech out there. Advisors are finding things, very similar. What would you say to an advisor who, let's use one of my clients, for example, who recently asked me, well, Travis, what do I do? I've got some clients that they are technology adverse. And he works for a company that, they have high net worth individuals that, kind of the older generation doesn't want to jump on a Zoom call, doesn't want to they're tired of the technology thing. That might be an issue, and maybe it's not one for you, but possibly, I don't know. I might be speaking out of turn on this one. What have you done with situations like that? What might be some best practices?
Do my experience is there is a certain population that just doesn't like Zoom. And so we're big fans of meeting them where they are. And so we're going to show up at their home, or we're going to work with them on those terms. For the ones that are willing to be adventurous, it's letting them know that there's somebody there to support them the whole way. It's with a really patient, open-hearted, hey, let's get on together. We'll work through a test session. Maybe it's going to their home and making sure they've got the right equipment and setting them up. But I've found that if family members, and usually it's the matriarch or the patriarch, feel like there is some support for them, they'd be willing to give it a try. Sometimes it is having one of the next gen in the home with them. So when we're having a family meeting, we might say, okay, you guys are together so that you can support each other. But I think if they know they have support, they might be willing to give it a try. And then there are just some that you're better off meeting them in person.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great idea, though, of having the next gen be involved, because you're all about families anyway. Like this makes a lot of sense, but that could be something that other advisors, they might not be thinking about, right? They're just, these are my clients. Well, maybe involve that next gen so that they're involved in the process, the idea, the planning piece, as well as helping them support on the technology That can be very productive. I like that,
Well,
Amy.
the question I usually get from advisors is, how do I get engaged with the next gen? And frankly, that's not for you necessarily to decide. It's how do you have the conversation with mom and dad about engaging the next gen? So I might start with mom and dad and say, hey, what would it look like for you if we were to include some of your kids in these conversations? What are some of the topics we want to engage? What are some of the topics we want to stay away from? And sometimes it's useful to say things like, legacies are really built on relationships, and relationships are built on communication strategies. So we've done this great job of preparing your assets for your family. How about we start to pivot and start preparing the family for the assets? And as your advisor, I can start having some of those conversations so that we have a better feel of where they are in this conversation. So I think that's one way advisors can start opening that door.
I really like that. I like what you just said there about preparing them, right? And these relationships for what's about to happen. This is a relationship business, as they always say, yet sometimes the relationship we look at is just advisor to client versus what's happening in the family. And, I've shared this with you, and my audience knows I have a degree in family and human development. That's my PhD. A lot of my work is done in social science to help understand the relational, really the softer side of money, as they call it. Softer, I don't know. Like, it tends to be more difficult, in my opinion. I love it when I was at Northwestern, and bless his heart, he has an MBA and he's a smart dude. And I really looked up to him, and I came in and I'm like, yeah, I settled on a major. He's like, oh, great. What'd you decide? I'm like, I'm doing, sociology. He's like, oh, a soft science. And he didn't mean it. He didn't mean derogatory, but I was like, what? There's nothing soft about it. This is the most studying humans is so difficult, right? Like the relationship side. Yet as financial advisors, I love the idea that we really should be preparing them for this relationship that's coming, and great perspective.
I think advisors, I find, are asking that question, what are the skills I need to be able to engage in some of these conversations? Because I think that they see, if they're not asking about the impact of wealth on the family, then somebody else is. And that's where things can get dicey for advisors. We worked with an advisor who was great friends with his client. Their kids grew up together. They went to the milestone events for each other, the weddings, the bar mitzvahs, the everything. And then on somewhere around the 18th hole, the client says, hey, you know what? I've got some news. I'm actually moving my 30 million over to another firm. And the advisor was truly stunned by the comment. And he said, what happened? And the guy said, well, they're talking to me about the family. I'm at an age where that's coming more into focus for me. I know your organization doesn't do any of that. We've never really spoken about that. So I think it's better if I move it over now. Needless to say, that advisor went through some of the training programs.
Yeah. I was going to say that was an ouch.
There's more and more of this showing up in the public discourse about how do advisors start building some level of competence in this space. And for me, the fundamental question they want to ask is, where is that threshold for each individual advisor? Is it that how far into these conversations am I willing to go? Or do I just want to have some resources like I would have other resources in my back pocket?
Yeah, well said. Very well said. That opens up an entire can of worms. We could spend in just an hour there talking about family dynamics, finances. I've given several presentations. I've done some study on it, a little bit here and there over the years, try to help advisors. And yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Like there is a threshold where some advisors really want to dive all in and they want to know everything. And some, at a relative point, want to know just how can I be dangerous with this enough to know that this is an issue and I'm not going to get blindsided like that client that you just mentioned, and they can utilize you, in a support role. So tell us, like, if advisors are like, hey, I actually really interested in this. I want to know about the family side. I want to get to know Amy a little bit better. What would you say are some things that they ought to look? Are there some questions that you have that you might ask clients about, that would be helpful for them to maybe at least uncover, is this an issue?
I think for advisors, it's really getting that first sentence right. It's memorizing a little bit of a script about why you care about the family. Because if you're just asking questions and you haven't set a context of why you're asking those questions, they're not going to know where you're going. They're going to still be listening from a financial mindset. So saying something along the lines of, we've done a great job preparing your assets for the family. Let's pivot now and start preparing the family for the assets. That's one way to start to shift that. Another way is to say something like, estate plans are written to take care of assets, not necessarily relationships. Legacies are built on relationships. So let's start talking about what those look like and what you'd like for them to look like in the future. And then I think having a list of really good questions to help the conversation move forward is a good way for an advisor to start. We happen to have 10 questions written for this purpose for advisors. You can find them in the book, you can find them on our website, but the questions are basically designed to start creating more awareness for families in this whole landscape of what it means to prepare the family. An example of one of the questions would be, our family has a mission statement that spells out the overall purpose of our wealth. So I would say, is that a yes or a no? It's not like a maybe. Does it exist or doesn't it? I think another good question is to ask, do heirs understand their future roles, and have they bought into those roles? Do they look forward to performing those roles? So for example, in a family, we had a mom and two kids. The dad had passed away, and one of the kids was was the executor, and another one had medical power of attorney. So we took them through this mock situation where mom goes to Africa, elephant sits on her head, and she wasn't able to talk or even get back. So the first question was, okay, which one of you have the responsibility of getting the elephant off of mom's head? And they weren't sure. They thought, well, I think the executor is the one that gets all the money, but I think they're also the one that can decide whether or not she stays on life support. And they were actually had their roles reversed. The one who thought she was the executor was the older, but actually it was her sister that was the executor because she had legal training. So they had said, sure, I'll do that, but nobody took the time to really find out what that role was. So I think that's just a useful question. And then sometimes they don't know what roles they could play. It could be like, what's the expectation of being a beneficiary? Like, what does mom and dad expect of me? And what do I expect of mom and dad? So that could be an interesting question that an advisor can ask just to start leveling the playing field there.
Great questions. And the resource of your book, the website, I've been there. I've looked at what you've got going on. Great testimonials, really well thought through and written ideas. Yeah, absolutely. I think advisors who have clients who are in this space, who are in this time of their life, would benefit greatly, even just from asking those questions, whether or not they contact you or not. But if they get to the point where like, oh, they're in too much over their head, to continue with this analogy, right? If they're, too much over their head and they realize they don't have the capacity to help and they'd like to partner with your firm, how do they reach out to you? How do they get in contact with you guys, Amy?
I think the website is a great way, because if they sign up on the website, they'll then be on our distribution list. So we publish at least 4 times a year. And then I do put together a little bit of a blog that's wealth and relationships. So that would be one way. That's the williamsgroup.org, O-R-G. And then, of course, if they want to reach out to us via email, amy@thewilliamsgroup.org would get them straight to me.
Wonderful. You've been fantastic guest. Thank you. Thank you for making time to be here on the Balanced Advisor podcast. advisors, if you've loved this, if you've liked it, if you just like, man, I really need to think on this more, like, share, comment, subscribe, and definitely get a hold of Amy, follow her with her book, the website. At least check out those questions, as you might use those in your ongoing planning with clients. They need you to do that. They honestly, they expect that you're the one to do that. So it's really our fiduciary responsibility not to use the F word too much, but you know what I mean? It does come up. And I do believe that this is part of what we do to not just retain the clients, but do the best interest, for that, or have them in your best interest. Thank you, Amy. Any last things that you would like to say before we close this segment?
Just the sooner the advisors can start these conversations, the better. When we see wealth does not transition successfully, it's because we've waited too long to have these conversations. So they will be serving their clients and their next generation in the most powerful way, the sooner they can get these conversations on the table. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us again, for being such a great guest. It was a pleasure to get to know you. And again, thank you, audience, for listening, for supporting this, and for being balanced advisors. Till the next episode, I'm Dr. Perry signing off. Thanks, guys.